will lead to a dead end, no matter how cost-effective. I say appears to be because the way we manage our balance sheets still excludes so many hidden costs. Damage to soils and
Inside the hidden corridors of the palace, a decision has quietly exploded into reality with shocking speed. Sources say King Charles has personally sanctioned a move few saw coming. Prince Andrew is being discreetly relocated to a remote farm in Norfolk, far from the public eye and royal limelight. There were no announcements, no statements, no ceremonial gestures, just a sudden and startling distance that has left courtiers and the public scrambling for answers. Whispers now ripple through palace corridors, fueled by speculation over timing, strategy and containment, while media crews scour every inch of Windsor and Norfolk for clues. Is this a temporary retreat designed to calm a brewing storm, a permanent exile, or a calculated manoeuvre to stabilise the monarchy as pressure mounts from every corner of Britain and beyond? Tonight, this move, executed in near total silence, has insiders calling it one of the most consequential royal interventions in years. What began as hushed whispers in the palace has now crystallised into a bold action. King Charles himself has reportedly authorised the relocation of his younger brother, Prince Andrew, to a farm on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. This wasn't a routine administrative adjustment, nor was it a temporary measure dressed up as practicality. It was deliberate, urgent, and strategic, a move designed to shut down a growing problem before it could spiral completely out of control. The timing couldn't be more revealing. The decision was finalised in February 2026, coinciding with renewed scrutiny over Andrew's long-standing and controversial ties to the late Jeffrey Epstein. Insiders describe the latest revelations as shocking, even distressing, reopening old wounds the palace had hoped were fading from public memory. For King Charles, this wasn't a moment for delay or discussion, but for decisive action. Those familiar with the decision-making process insist it was the king acting alone, without pressure from advisors, committees, or external influence. Behind the scenes, sources say the language surrounding the relocation was revealing. The word containment was used repeatedly, a stark signal of the seriousness of the concern. The king reportedly believes that every attempt by his brother to exist independently or to remain loosely connected to public life only intensified risks. Each appearance, each casual sighting, and every image captured by cameras carried the potential to reignite public outrage and further erode the crown's credibility. Norfolk offered the perfect solution: isolation, distance, and control. King Charles's awareness of public sentiment played a critical role. He didn't need to be reminded or confronted. The mood of the nation was evident in headlines, commentary, and the simmering tension beyond palace gates. Recent sightings of Andrew riding near Windsor and waving to cameras reportedly triggered alarm. Those images weren't just moments of leisure. They symbolised defiance and a dangerous lack of accountability to the monarch. In response, Charles accelerated Andrew's removal from Royal Lodge, redirecting him to a farm far from public view. Sources stress that this was not punishment in private conversations. It was framed as necessity. The king reportedly agreed to fund Andrew's relocation and provide a modest stipend for living expenses, ensuring he could maintain a dignified but contained lifestyle. Boundaries were clear. Andrew would no longer inhabit the ambiguous space between royal privilege and public exposure. The choice of Norfolk itself carried symbolism. Physical and psychological separation from centres of royal activity was crucial. Insiders say the decision was executed swiftly because delay could have been catastrophic. In Charles's eyes, hesitation was dangerous. What might look like a simple relocation was, in fact, a decisive intervention reshaping Andrew's future and signalling the lengths the king is willing to go to protect the monarchy, even if it meant acting entirely alone. This move is about far more than a new address. It's about controlling visibility, and more importantly, ending it. Charles reportedly reached a point where allowing Andrew even limited exposure was intolerable. Every unexpected appearance carried the risk of inflaming public anger that the palace could no longer afford to manage. Sources close to the monarch say the goal was clear and uncompromising: Andrew had to disappear from public view, not temporarily, but permanently. The final straw reportedly came in Windsor. Andrew was spotted riding through the area, passing camera crews, waving and smiling as if nothing had changed. To the palace, it was alarming and tone-deaf, a gesture that threatened months of painstaking efforts to distance the monarchy from scandal. It wasn't just a misstep. It was a stark reminder that informal restrictions were no longer enough to contain risks. Charles's understanding of public sentiment was central. He didn't need advisors to explain simmering anger. He felt it in headlines, commentary, and in the fragile trust still extended toward the crown. Every casual wave, every appearance carried real danger. Allowing Andrew to continue these appearances, even unintentionally, risked pushing the nation's tolerance past its limit. The Norfolk relocation was designed to remove chance encounters with cameras, prevent unplanned moments of visibility, and shield the monarchy from consequences of Andrew's continued public presence. Each photograph, each smile, each fleeting appearance carried a cost the institution could no longer absorb. Charles's approach was rooted not only in damage control, but also in preservation. Credibility, once lost, is notoriously difficult to restore, and insiders note a growing fear that any perception of leniency would fuel public cynicism toward the crown. Removing Andrew from public view also allowed the palace to regain narrative control. Distance replaced unpredictability, and structure replaced chaos. Norfolk, far from media hubs, offered a controlled environment where visibility could be carefully managed. The objective wasn't spectacle, it was silence. It wasn't explanation, it was containment behind closed doors. This strategy was essential for the monarchy's survival. Charles wasn't reacting to a single incident. He was responding to years of accumulating risk that had been ignored for too long, unchecked. These risks could have caused irreversible damage to his reign and the institution itself. The consequences of inaction were becoming impossible to ignore. The question now is how a monarch navigates mounting threats that could shake centuries of tradition. Can royal protocol survive when family members challenge boundaries, intentionally or not? From privilege to isolation, Andrew's relocation signals that even senior royals are not immune from accountability. The palace has made a statement without words. Control, order, and reputation come first. For years, Andrew had occupied Royal Lodge, a sprawling 30-room mansion in Berkshire near Windsor. It wasn't just a residence, it was a symbol of status, continuity, and seniority. Even after his dramatic fall from favour, Royal Lodge quietly reinforced his identity as a senior royal. Leaving it behind was more than a simple change of address. It was a rupture. Royal sources say Andrew is now expected to vacate Royal Lodge and move to Sandringham's Marsh Farm, an area typically reserved for private retreats rather than the base of sidelined royals. The downgrade is sharp, but the symbolism is even clearer. Marsh Farm, a modest 5-bedroom former farmhouse, sits on low, swampy land below sea level. Its stark contrast to Royal Lodge couldn't be more obvious, and insiders note that King Charles personally selected it to reinforce the message: privilege, visibility, and influence are no longer guaranteed. Marsh Farm represents far more than a new home. It symbolises distance from the palace, separation from the public gaze, and a break from the trappings of royal life that once defined Andrew's identity. Royal Lodge had preserved residual status even as public roles faded. Marsh Farm represents isolation, restraint, and a recalibration of expectations. Every detail of this relocation, size, location, and surroundings, was designed to emphasize the scale of change. The Norfolk move is deliberate, symbolic, and irreversible. It demonstrates that the monarchy can and will act decisively to protect itself. The contrast between Andrew's old life of visibility and his new life of seclusion is stark, sending a clear message to the public, media, and royal family alike. Missteps have consequences, privilege has limits, and even senior royals are subject to control. The palace has drawn a line, and Andrew now resides well beyond it. While he still has a roof over his head and funds to live, his surroundings are a daily reminder of boundaries, oversight, and the consequences of past behaviour. Marsh Farm underscores the message: royalty is a privilege, not a guarantee. From the grandeur of Berkshire to the modest fields of Norfolk, Andrew's relocation is a statement about the lengths King Charles will go to protect the monarchy's reputation, authority, and future. And so, Marsh Farm stands as the new chapter in Andrew's life, a life now defined not by public appearances or residual prestige, but by isolation, discretion, and control. Royal Lodge may have been a symbol of enduring identity within the institution, but Marsh Farm is a monument to consequence, separation, and the unflinching reach of the crown. Far from the glittering heart of royal ceremonies, removed from the grandeur of palace life, a quieter and more secluded world has emerged for Prince Andrew. The setting is starkly different. There are no grand halls echoing with history, no sweeping driveways lined with manicured lawns that signal rank or privilege. Instead, the environment emphasizes isolation, practicality, and a level of control rarely required of someone so long accustomed to prominence. Those with knowledge of the move stress that this relocation is not about mere convenience or logistical necessity. It is a carefully calculated message. Every detail, every step of the process has been infused with symbolic weight, underscoring that Andrew's days of effortless influence are behind him. By shifting Andrew from the expansive Royal Lodge, a home of 30 rooms nestled near Windsor, surrounded by the legacy of royal stature, to the far humbler Marsh Farm on the Sandringham estate, King Charles is broadcasting a statement as clear as it is deliberate. This is no temporary holding pattern or a disguised luxury masquerading as modesty. It is a visible and undeniable acknowledgement that Andrew no longer occupies the space he once did within the monarchy. His proximity to power, prestige, and visibility has been stripped, and the palace wants the world to understand it without the need for public pronouncements or ceremonial gestures. The choice of Sandringham itself adds layers of strategic significance. As one of the king's most personal estates, it allows for direct oversight of Andrew's day-to-day life, while keeping him away from the unpredictable glare of media attention that relentlessly followed him in Windsor. In effect, Andrew's movements, appearances, and opportunities for public exposure can now be monitored quietly, safely, and without fanfare. Yet there is another, subtler element at play. By placing him firmly under the king's supervision, Charles reinforces the reality that this chapter of Andrew's life is no longer his to direct independently. The prince is no longer free to craft appearances or control perception. Every action is now contained, every misstep potentially magnified, and every interaction carefully circumscribed. For palace watchers and royal commentators, the move reads as a stripping away of senior status without a formal declaration. Titles may remain on paper, but influence, privilege, and access to the inner circles of power have been decisively curtailed. Royal Lodge was a tangible emblem of what Andrew used to be, a figure of prominence, residual influence, and lingering authority despite public scandal. Marsh Farm, by contrast, represents what he has become, a relocated, reduced, and reshaped figure whose role in the monarchy has been sharply redefined. Insiders emphasize that the symbolic impact of the downgrade extends beyond Andrew himself. It sends a clear signal to other members of the royal family and court alike, demonstrating that past status offers no protection from the king's decisive interventions. As planning shifted into reality, what was initially intended as a discreet, practical solution began to expose complications and anxieties that the palace had not fully anticipated. Marsh Farm, a 5-bedroom former farmhouse, was never designed to accommodate a high-profile royal figure. Concerns arose immediately. Could the property meet the exacting standards of security, logistics, and functionality demanded by someone with Andrew's notoriety? Could it safely contain both him and the risks his presence inevitably carried? Insiders began to question whether the property could ever be made suitable, no matter how much effort or funding was poured into renovations. Almost immediately, the signs of a massive security overhaul became evident. Builders, engineers, and security teams were observed working intensively on the property, installing reinforced gates, upgrading alarm systems, and preparing sophisticated communications infrastructure, requirements essential for any royal resident, even one intended to remain firmly out of the public eye. These upgrades were far from cosmetic. They reflected the seriousness with which the palace viewed Andrew's ongoing risk, despite his deliberate withdrawal from public life. Yet even as these measures were put in place, doubts persisted. Could Marsh Farm truly offer the discretion, protection, and operational functionality required for a man of Andrew's profile, given its age, layout, and environment? The location itself raised further questions. Nestled on swampy land below sea level, the farmhouse presented challenges far beyond mere aesthetics. Security experts reportedly voiced concerns about access points, visibility, and long-term resilience, issues far easier to manage in a purpose-built royal property than in a converted rural farmhouse. Any breach or lapse in security would not only compromise Andrew, but risk drawing public attention to a family the monarchy was already striving to shield. Adding to the unease were reports of pest control interventions. Officers were observed addressing a mole problem on the grounds, an issue minor in isolation but magnified by the symbolic stakes of Andrew's relocation. Within the palace, this sparked further discomfort. A senior royal, even a disgraced one, was now occupying a property with practical vulnerabilities, creating awkward optics and raising questions about planning, judgment, and foresight. What had begun as a symbolic solution was now threatening to appear chaotic, undermining the careful messaging the move was meant to convey. These developments sparked intense debate behind closed doors. Some insiders worried that, while Charles's decision was firm in intention, its practical execution might prove difficult to sustain. Others focused on optics. Substantial resources were being poured into a property that might never fully meet the expectations or needs of a royal figure, highlighting the stark contrast between the effort required to secure Marsh Farm and the relative ease of protecting more established royal estates. The sense grew that this move, as decisive as it was in theory, was fraught with challenges in practice. At the same time, these logistical concerns underscored the deeper tension at the heart of the situation. Charles was determined to keep Andrew out of public view, away from media attention and away from expense borne by taxpayers. Achieving this required a delicate balance. Each upgrade, each adjustment, risked becoming another story, a headline or whisper, feeding scrutiny on an already embattled monarchy. Within palace walls, perceptions mattered as much as practical outcomes. A senior royal, living in a property beset by security and maintenance challenges, could easily become a symbol of poor judgment or lack of foresight. Yet others countered that discomfort was precisely the point. Marsh Farm was never meant to be glamorous, only functional, contained and discreet. Still, as renovations, staffing adjustments, and security measures continued, the arrangement began to feel messier than intended. Whispers grew louder. Could this relocation truly achieve its aim of containment and invisibility? Or was it creating new vulnerabilities in both perception and logistics? Every practical problem carried reputational weight, adding to the sense that the palace was navigating uncharted territory, where symbolic intent and real-world implementation risked colliding. Attention inevitably shifted to Andrew himself. According to sources who spoke to the Daily Mail and other outlets, his first encounter with Marsh Farm was deeply unsettling. Having spent decades surrounded by the spacious residences, extensive staff, and quiet privileges of royal life, Andrew was reportedly appalled by what he found. He allegedly described Marsh Farm as poky, a word capturing both the physical scale of the house and the emotional shock of the downgrade. For a man accustomed to sprawling estates, this 5-bedroom farmhouse represented a dramatic and uncomfortable shift. Andrew reportedly noted that he had not lived in a space that small since leaving his Buckingham Palace apartment, a stark comparison highlighting how dramatically his circumstances had changed. Royal Lodge, with its 30 rooms and stately grandeur, had allowed him to maintain a residual sense of relevance and identity even as his public role diminished. Marsh Farm stripped all of that away in a single, sobering transition, forcing him to confront a life now circumscribed by boundaries, oversight, and diminished status. Staffing further emphasized the practical and symbolic reduction in privilege. Unlike his former residences, Marsh Farm does not permit live-in staff. The absence of household support represents a sharp break from Andrew's accustomed lifestyle. In response, Charles reportedly offered a compromise. Andrew may have access to staff from Sandringham House on an ad hoc basis. While functional, this arrangement still marks a significant step down from the constant support he once relied on. Insiders describe Andrew's emotional journey as unfolding in stages. Initial outrage gave way to frustration when it became clear the decision was non-negotiable. There were no alternative residences waiting in the wings, no hidden reversals being orchestrated behind the scenes. The palace's message was firm. The relocation was happening, and resistance would serve no purpose. Over time, that anger softened into reluctant acceptance. Andrew, according to a source quoted by The Times, came to realize that opposing the move would only prolong discomfort and tension. Eventually, resignation set in. He had no choice but to face the reality before him, however unpalatable it was. Another insider noted that while Andrew remained unimpressed with the property and its limitations, he began to accept that this would define the rest of his life. This acceptance was not born of contentment but of exhaustion and inevitability. The prince had to adapt to the parameters imposed upon him, constrained by circumstance and the will of a crowned brother who had decided that his visibility and influence could no longer be tolerated. The human drama of Andrew's reaction adds crucial depth to the story. It illustrates the personal cost of decisions made in the interest of institutional survival, highlighting just how far his position has fallen. Anger, shock, and eventual resignation all underscore the reality of a man confronting boundaries he cannot ignore. Marsh Farm is not just a residence, it is a boundary, a line drawn by a crown unwilling to bend for past prestige, sentiment, or private desire. It marks the end of one life and the beginning of another, defined by limitations, oversight, and a sharply reduced role within a monarchy that has little patience left for discretion or indulgence. As Prince Andrew settled into a reluctant acceptance of his drastically altered circumstances, the attention inevitably shifted back to the figure carrying the heaviest burden in this unfolding royal drama, King Charles himself. Behind every carefully orchestrated relocation, behind every firm decision made in hushed corridors, lies a man grappling with a problem that has dogged him throughout his reign and, indeed, followed him for decades. The weight of responsibility, both personal and institutional, pressed down on him in ways few outside the palace walls could ever comprehend. Insiders close to the monarchy reveal that Charles has willingly assumed sole responsibility for his brother, taking steps that underscore not only the gravity of the situation, but also the stark absence of any remaining alternatives. Central to this extraordinary decision is the King's choice to privately fund Andrew's accommodation and provide a modest stipend to cover his essential living costs. It is a solution designed to remove Andrew entirely from public funding, a move that silences critics and addresses a long-standing source of public anger. But while pragmatic, the arrangement is far from generous. Sources stress that it is not motivated by indulgence, but by necessity, a strategy forged in the crucible of years of repeated missteps and the ongoing risk of renewed scandal. According to palace confidants, every prior attempt Andrew made to support himself independently ended in miscalculation or public embarrassment. Whether through poorly managed associations, ill-judged business ventures, or attempts to maintain visibility, each initiative only deepened the crisis and created fresh complications for the monarchy. One insider summed up the situation bluntly: every effort at independence only led to further trouble. It was against this backdrop that the concept of containment emerged, not as punishment, but as the least damaging option remaining. Those within the inner circles of the palace describe this as putting him in a controlled environment in the hope of minimizing further fallout. This containment strategy also illuminates the deeply personal dimension of Charles's dilemma. As king, he is charged with safeguarding the institution at all costs, yet as a brother, he confronts the collapse of familial bonds under relentless public scrutiny. Sources describe a man acutely aware of the human cost of his decisions, aware that any hesitation or misstep could trigger renewed crisis. The balance between duty and compassion has rarely been more sharply defined. The king's role in this scenario is a delicate tightrope walk. He must preserve the crown's stability while absorbing the personal consequences of a brother's misjudgments. The optics of the arrangement are carefully considered. By personally funding Andrew's living expenses, Charles sends an unspoken message. He understands the nation's anger and is acting accordingly, without need for coercion or public admonishment. He does not need to be shouted at to grasp the mood of the country. He feels it in the headlines, in whispers across the palace, and in the general sense that public patience has worn thin. The decision to accelerate Andrew's removal from Royal Lodge and relocate him to Marsh Farm in Norfolk is a tangible expression of that awareness. It signals decisiveness, control, and an unwillingness to tolerate blurred boundaries or half measures. Financial independence combined with physical removal ensures Andrew is firmly under the king's control. Risks of spontaneous appearances, unsanctioned interactions, or renewed scandal are sharply curtailed. Advisors reportedly view this as a stabilizing move, one that replaces uncertainty with structure in a time when every gesture, every glance, and every image can ignite public backlash. Predictability in this context becomes not a limitation but a shield, yet the emotional toll of this role should not be underestimated. By assuming full responsibility for Andrew, Charles absorbs the consequences of his brother's past errors while simultaneously striving to prevent future damage. He occupies a position marked by frustration, resolve, and a profound, unspoken sadness. This strategy of containment and private funding hints at a broader shift in governance. Unlike past approaches that allowed problems to linger, Charles's method is decisive, inward-facing, and designed to minimize volatility. The message is unmistakable. The monarchy can no longer afford instability from within. Still, even the best-laid plans are not immune to complications. Rising costs associated with security upgrades, estate modifications, and personnel adjustments began to cast long shadows over the intended arrangements. Every step forward demanded careful calculation, with numbers, logistics, and operational considerations weighing heavily on decision-makers. These expenses were not abstract. They reflected the delicate balance of safety, discretion, and functionality required for Andrew's containment. Any misstep threatened to draw attention to the very individuals the palace sought to shield. The property itself continued to present unforeseen challenges. Pest problems, minor at first, proved stubbornly persistent, creating operational headaches that demanded immediate attention. In the context of a royal household, even seemingly trivial disruptions carry weight. Staff whispered about ongoing issues, and the pressure to resolve them before Andrew's final move intensified. Meanwhile, the prince's own dissatisfaction loomed large. His discomfort was no longer private grumbling, but a palpable influence on high-level decision-making, affecting timelines, logistics, and resource allocation. Every step in planning required careful negotiation with Andrew's stance in mind, yet those within the palace were acutely aware that fully appeasing him was impossible. His presence, or potential absence, shadowed every conversation, injecting tension into processes that might otherwise have seemed straightforward. Whispers of a last-minute reconsideration even emerged, hinting at alternative properties on the Sandringham estate as potential contingencies. Each new option carried its own set of risks, uncertainties, and logistical hurdles. The palace's refusal to comment publicly only intensified speculation. What was intended as a controlled, deliberate process grew increasingly complex under the microscope of internal scrutiny and external curiosity. Every decision risked reopening debates thought settled, and the carefully maintained equilibrium now appeared fragile. Stability was contingent on variables only partially addressed within the palace walls, from property limitations to the prince's willingness to comply, to the ongoing challenges of security and staffing. The sense of an ongoing crisis persisted, one that would demand vigilance, discretion, and adaptability from even the most seasoned advisors. Within these tense walls, Charles continues to navigate a labyrinth of responsibility, risk, and family loyalty. Each choice carries emotional, practical, and symbolic weight. The relocation, funding, and containment are more than administrative measures. They are manifestations of the monarchy's need to protect itself, a strategy born out of necessity rather than desire. The human dimension cannot be ignored. A crowned brother bears responsibility not only for an institution, but for the human lives intertwined with it. The pressure, observers note, is relentless, shaping decisions, interactions, and the overall tone of leadership. And while Marsh Farm represents containment, the larger story is about control, perception, and the careful management of risk. Andrew's reduced role, financial dependence, and geographical isolation serve as constant reminders that privilege alone no longer guarantees safety from consequence. Each adjustment to property, staff, and security is both a practical necessity and a symbolic act, reinforcing the boundaries the king has drawn around his brother's life. Even as these measures take hold, questions linger. Could the palace face chaos from within if Andrew resists further? Or if unforeseen complications arise? Who ultimately bears the cost if the plan falters? Every calculation, every investment, and every decision must anticipate both logistical realities and public perception. The monarchy operates under intense scrutiny, where missteps are magnified and mistakes are never forgotten. So, the drama of containment is ongoing. With costs, property challenges, and human emotion intertwining, the palace remains on high alert. Decisions are continuously recalibrated, potential risks weighed, and contingencies considered. In this environment, no detail is too small to ignore, and every choice carries consequences far beyond its immediate impact. Amid all of this, the king moves forward, absorbing responsibility silently, acting decisively, and navigating a path where family loyalty, public duty, and institutional preservation intersect. The weight of Andrew's missteps falls squarely on him, and he carries it with the resolve of a monarch determined to protect the crown above all else. What, then, could tip the palace's fragile plans into chaos? Will the original strategy hold, or will a last-minute pivot redefine the outcome? And in the end, who will bear the personal, financial, and reputational costs if the delicate equilibrium collapses? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could illuminate what is still hidden behind these palace walls. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.